An additional one?
Well, this
This
is
is
a lot of
paper.
stuff that was presented. I did.
All righty.
All right, I'd like to call to order the planning commission meeting for May the 17th, 2023. If you would, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. For those of you who do not know, the gentleman to my far left is Dan Keene, Brian Dennis, I'm Steve Birch, this is Tom Hill. Shall we start the agenda with a public hearing for Cowles Meadows subdivision? And for that, I would ask our planner, Todd Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Staff has reviewed the application and made recommendations in two documents. Mike Jonathan here is also present tonight and field questions about anything that you all feel like he can help answer. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. In our staff report and recommendations, we went through the applicable sections of code and we made findings of each based on what the applicant has submitted. As this is a land use application, it is the applicant's burden to demonstrate that they've met all the code requirements, and having reviewed the application thoroughly, staff felt that they had met or can meet those with conditions of approval. So we've recommended a list of conditions of approval at the end of the document. One of the omissions from the staff report was our findings on chapter 20. And there is also an error in the minimum lot size that presented in the R zone findings. The minimum lot size for a subdivision is 6,000 square feet. And the R zone, the minimum lot size is 4,000. Because the applicant is proposing a subdivision, even though it's in the residential zone, the subdivision requirements in chapter 20 require that the minimum lot size be 6,000 square feet. The applicant hadn't submitted a variance to that. So tonight we have to either condition the application on being revised to show that they meet that minimum requirement, or we couldn't approve it because we don't have the ability to vary a standard absent a request in the record from the applicant. They didn't submit a variance application. I think that those lots are modifiable. The applicants here and can testify to that as part of their presentation. In the event that they're not modifiable, unlike planning commission, council would have the ability to, so you'd have to approve it with the recommendation to be 6,000 square feet. But when it got up to council, they could make the decision that whatever the applicant's able to achieve is close enough, because council has more authority in this case than planning commission does. We have to make findings based on the code and based on the request that's here. So staff is recommending adding a condition of approval that says prior to engineering plan approval, the applicant must submit a revised preliminary plat showing compliance with 20.03D 6,000 square foot lot minimums. So with that added condition of approval, and then there was one other omission upon close review of the plat. I noticed that even though we had stated throughout the process that the lots were going to avoid impact to wetlands and buffers, there are two lots, 75 and 95. Both of them are partially within a wetland buffer area. So another condition that staff is requesting be added to the staff report is that those lots would be revised so that no portion of the lot is within the wetland buffer. And we make that request just because that's the way the project has been presented. It's gone through secret review. All the public agencies who commented on it, including State Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Ecology and everybody else that has authority to review wetlands and habitat areas, without the assumption that it would have no direct impacts to those. So with those two added conditions, and the other findings contained in the staff report and the other conditions referenced both in TIFA and in the final staff report. Staff is recommending that you all can approve this development as conditioned. If there's any questions about the staff report or about any of the elements in there, I'd be happy to address those now, or as staff, you can ask questions of Mike and I at any time.
Can you tell me the name of those two lots again that were in the wetlands?
75 and 95.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
And if it would help, we do have an exhibit we put up on the board, I can point them out. Doing the car all day, so. So, actually, on this map, it's 74
Yeah, the numbers are a little bit different.
and 94.
And that was the original one, right?
I think so, yeah.
And the engineering side of it.
So, but in any case, maybe we don't reference lot numbers specifically, but just have a generic condition that says that.
This one, yeah, yeah.
Remove all lots from. This is the one we're talking about here, and this is the steep slope line. The wetland buffer line is just cutting off this back corner, so it's a very small impact to the back of the lot. And then again here, this is the steep slope line. The applicant submitted a geotech report that says lots are buildable with certain mitigation conditions, so that's part of our conditions of approval. But again, just this back corner is within the wetland buffer. So we're not as concerned about the geotech steep slope setback because the applicant had submitted a geotech report that Mike has reviewed and I've looked at. And it seems to suggest mitigation conditions that can support development. So, if there's any other questions, we have to do this.
On lot 85. The 60% grading plan showed essentially a 2-to-1 slope about halfway through the lot. Has that been changed? Because at that time it only had about 15 feet of flat surface with the setbacks from the building and the property line from the front to the back of the lot.
So if you.
Is that for a question to wait?
Or we can ask the applicant that after their presentation to it. If you want staff's response, then Mike can look at it and see. But since Emily's the engineer.
Why don't we wait and we'll put all our questions out there and
That's a
then
good
we can have a grab bag of who can answer this.
That sounds great.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, do you want to move on to the applicant presentation?
Yes, that's fine. We'll be speaking for the applicant. Okay, Emily, you're up.
So the name and everything for the record.
Okay, so my name is Emily Stevens, and you want the address of.
With Winter.
With Winter.
Can you also turn around to the? So if I can.
For the home viewers.
Yeah, the home view.
Okay, so Emily Stevens, I'm with here, I'm representing the applicant Red Rock, who is proposing this development. So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, thank you for having us tonight. Unfortunately, Red Rock was unable to be here tonight, so that's why I will be representing them. Didn't prepare much of a presentation, but you're all familiar with the application. It's proposing a 97 lot subdivision. A good portion of the site is encumbered by wetland and some steep slopes. So we are proposing to protect that wetland area with an outlot, working closely with the geotech to make sure that we're providing the right protection and designs for the slope stability. And as you can see, there's going to be 2 accesses off of Toledo Vader and then 1 access into Plamondon. We are working with the county on some frontage improvements to Toledo Vader Road and Plamondon, both of which will involve half width improvements, and some pedestrian access. Along with that, stormwater, and things like that. So obviously, there's a large stormwater facility to provide stormwater mitigation, and then we would be providing utilities, sanitary, storm and water to the development as well. So with that, I guess I'll just open it up for questions, might as well. If there's anything specific, obviously, I'm happy to answer some questions, and I know Todd and Mike are here to help out with them.
Is there a drawing of that stormwater holding facility or? There is a drawing?
Yeah, I would say, since this preliminary plat application, it might have been submitted along with the 60% plans. We have honed in on the details of it a little bit more, but there's still quite a bit of work to be done to take it from a 60% plan all the way to 100%. So I would say right now, we probably have a cross section of what that's gonna look like. But it's preliminary at this point.
Okay. But you're confident that can be dealt with?
Yes. Mhm.
There is a copy of the 60% plan set that's part of your record too. If you wanted to review that specifically, it's part of what you have in the record.
Daniel, you got questions that you want to bring forth now or you want to reserve?
Not currently.
I have another question.
Yes, sir.
Scribbled down a note, but I didn't reference or I had found item 9 on page 8, but I don't know which report. It dealt with a 15% bond. Sound familiar? Paid back in 2 years. Is that standard? Is that something that?
Yeah. You want to answer that?
Yeah, so I included that as a recommended condition. It is something that is fairly typical for development projects that to ensure that if there's defects in, a sewer or a, pavement issue or something like a sidewalk, that the developer either comes back and fixes that within that 2-year period, or if they aren't around or won't do that, then you can make a claim on the bond to have that completed.
Okay.
And so that 15% amount is fairly typical for jurisdictions in the area. It wasn't something that was specifically stated in your code, so I wanted to make sure that we had something in place for the protection of the city once the development's complete.
Now, will they be released from liability as the phases go? Or not until final?
Well, so typically, if they were to phase this, and it's not necessarily clear yet, I suspect, on whether you're going to do that.
They have proposed a phase development.
Right, but you may or may not, I mean,
Construct it in
you could conceivably construct it as once.
Right.
But typically, if they're going to phase it, then they would request final plat approval. They would build the improvements for that to support that first phase. They would request final plat approval for that first phase, and with that final plat approval, we would essentially review to make sure those infrastructure improvements were complete, and then as part of that approval package, they would submit that bond for that first phase. That would be for 2 years on that first phase, and then when they went to the next phase, they would submit another final plat approval package for the infrastructure that was constructed as part of the second phase, and there would be a bond for those improvements that would be for 2 years from when you accept the second phase.
But you're not far enough along in the planning process or you're not necessarily sure you're going to phase this out. Maybe it'll be all at once, maybe it'll be in phases.
What the owner's intending, it's likely gonna be in phases. We haven't quite nailed down exact phase lines or how many phases there will be. So to answer your question, we don't have it locked in yet, but it is likely that there will be phases to the buildings.
See, my main concern is with regards to having a phase completed and having the bond running, and for some reason, construction is delayed. And then you go into a phase after 2 years of sitting stagnant, which, Wenlock had that happen to them in one of the subdivisions. And now you have traffic running over existing improvements that is not designed to run over those existing improvements. And the geotech was pretty clear that the sections that they provided, recommended for the street sections, do not take into account construction traffic, loaded cement trucks and loaded rock and asphalt trucks. So how does the city protect itself?
With this particular, I would suspect that you could bring, because you've got multiple connections to streets, that you could bring construction traffic through the undeveloped area, rather than bring it through the developed area. So that would be one way to mitigate that, is to, require construction, either having construction traffic for the future phases, that it doesn't come up through the first phase.
Would the city oversee that, or would the developer act in good faith there?
I would think that they'd have to submit then a haul route plan for future phases to the engineer doing the inspection. So, because the person who's going to be on site is going to be the one that makes sure that that's adhered to. And whoever that engineer might be that's working for the city as an inspector would, with the approval of the city, then authorize a haul route that makes sense to protect the city's interest and also allow for construction traffic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly makes sense.
So you could add that as a condition of approval that they have to, I mean, as part of a typical construction plan approval set, there's not a haul route identification needed, and that's not a typical requirement. So unless you all made that a condition of approval in this development.
Well,
Typically, I think the developer would avoid destroying the roads internal to their subdivision, because they have a maintenance bond that they posted that would be used to repair that, and they're hopeful to get that back. And because they don't want to destroy the streets because they're selling homes at the same time that they're building homes. So there's not a lot of policing that typically goes on there, but it's sometimes it is an issue, and in those instances, it's always a case of how do we fix this and who's going to repair the street. So, but it oftentimes it's not.
okay. Can we get back to the grading then, if we're going to ask questions on that? Todd, as you know, I had a question on lot 85, or there is a question on lot 85 with regard to the grading that I saw on 60% plans. And that was the fact that the slope began at such a point in the lot that it did not allow for the setbacks unless you were going to cantilever the house on the side of the hill. And that was a question for me.
Sure.
We can pull up the grading plan too. That's in the 60% engineering plan set. I think it's the grading and erosion control in sheet C110. It's part of the planning commission application materials.
So
Engineering.
I think that's a pretty similar. I'm not sure actually.
Was that?
It's pretty similar to the original Plumber flat grading too.
I didn't know if it might have changed with regard because they have the elevated pedestrian pathway now. If that had changed the ultimate cemetery of the lot.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And gotten rid of this world.
Do you want me to wait till they pull it up, or do you want me to start answering?
Go for it.
So, Mr. Chair, the grading is still likely what you saw was the 60%. And what we actually were doing with that, still even at 60%, was sort of a mass grading plan. With the intent that either between 60% and 100%, it kind of depends on what the developer would like from our efforts on the engineering plans or even the city. We did this mass grading, knowing that between the 60% and 100%, we were gonna be going through and showing retaining walls where some of those lots. You could, I think, I can't speak directly to lot 85, but in general, when you look at that grading plan. You can see it's a nice lot and then it drops and then nice lots. So the intent is that a lot of those areas where we show the steep slopes would become retaining walls so that we can have nice flat grading for the building pads.
And this one's right on Toledo Vader,
Yes.
right? It's kind of pinched
Okay,
there as that drops off towards Toledo Vader.
And that is, so our design engineer right now is running cross sections along Toledo Vader Road. To start honing in on that detailed grading. That is something that we had flagged with the 60% that the effort needed to be taken further. But we were waiting for input from the county on that exact cross section that they were gonna be requiring.
Along the same lines, I'm looking at the grading plan for that included the blown up version of the detention basin.
Yes,
I know that the engineer in his staff report indicated there was a slope that was 1.81 to 1 that
yeah,
doesn't fall within the parameter.
yeah,
And one of the things that I was looking at was, which is a big bone of contention in Winlock right now, is whether your finished contours are gonna actually meet existing grade. And we all think that that's a wonderful thing to have happen, but you'd be surprised how often it doesn't. And I want to make some clarification from the planning commission's status side that in the event that the grades do not meet, the contractor or the developer will construct a retaining wall to protect the property interests of the adjacent owner. Did you get that?
It's in the record.
Oh,
I
okay.
got the general intent that you wanted to also include a condition that,
It could go away on its own with drawing of the grading plan, but in some instances, they were in it from 1.5 to 4 feet difference between the finished contour and the existing ground, so.
yeah, and that will be modified before we get to 100% plan, so everything ties in.
so as a condition of approval, you could require them to modify that before they get engineering plan approvals.
Okay,
A simple condition for them.
that makes sense.
And then you have a grading plan up on the screen over there too. So
Would that resolve,
we can zoom in and you can look at specific lots if you'd like.
would that resolve the fact that lot 85 is overlapping into the road?
It should.
Okay.
That will, and so will some of the furthering of the engineering design, cleaning up the grading, and tying it into existing based on survey. That should all take care of that.
I asked you to remind me of something, remember, Todd?
I do.
Now's the time.
Was it the record drawing?
Yes. I think we're in agreement that it would be in the city's best interest to have as-built drawings. As opposed to red lines, which I've seen in the past, and using the original drawings with markups on them. Is that correct? We would like to,
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's fairly typical.
I think it is too.
I did do a little bit of looking in standards here this afternoon before I came, and the water system design standards actually require
Oh,
record drawings to be provided, but that's the only.
only one.
It's not specific in the code or specific on the sewer standards. It's just the water standards for some reason that have that requirement, so.
So we'll get that for water crossings, we'll get that for sewer, we'll get that for monuments
I
and,
think it's worthwhile, I mean, certainly worthwhile to, in my opinion, say. That could be a condition,
yes.
if that's important to you to say. As part of the.
I don't think it's gonna be important to me. It may be important to my grandson.
Yeah, absolutely, but to the city. That we include that as an additional condition that record drawings would be provided as.
Very good.
Chair Birch, I know that you also had some questions about the roof drains.
Yes, I did. The geotechnical report was pretty specific in that they wanted no infiltration of water from the site going, remaining on site, and they dictated that the roof drains be hard piped to the storm system. And yet I've been hearing, I've been seeing a few things that talked about getting credits, and having splash blocks and using swales of 50 feet in length to clean the water, but that still allows for infiltration, which is, I needed some clarification on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, so we did talk to the geotech about that. We got, at some point, we amended his report with a statement from him. He had no issue utilizing the splash blocks in the 50-foot flow path. Because the infiltration, I guess, and the groundwater around the site, it was kind of spotty where there was groundwater close to the surface. And he did not have a concern with using it for that sort of flow control, taking the splash blocks from the roof drains to the street. He had more of a concern if we were to concentrate like a larger flow to an infiltration facility where it would likely just sit.
I didn't see him having a problem with site water being funneled via swale to a storm drain collection facility, which made me question why he was so adamant about the roof drains. But roof drains do cause a lot of water runoff. You know, they're taking in a lot of surface area when it rains hard, so. You can get it by him.
And we had some discussion with the applicant over that same particular issue. And they had provided some documentation from their geotech, softening up that language that was in the original report, clarifying that, as Emily indicated, that they didn't have a concern with using that as conveyance, essentially. It was more if you were trying to actually put it into the ground, that would probably not be very successful. So the upshot, if the splash box and these dispersion, essentially they're dispersion paths, so that the water slows down a little bit, it gets a little bit treated as it gets out to the street, and then it goes into the collection system and then makes its way to the pond. It allows the pond to get a little bit smaller. If we assume that it hits the roof, it goes in a drain, and it's piped directly to the storm system, it gets to the pond faster, and the pond has to be larger in order to be able to manage that water. So I think we're satisfied with some additional, back and forth with the applicant and their geotech, that seems to be a reasonable approach to go ahead and use the splash box. There are still a couple of lots that had a little bit of a shorter flow path that we're working, to make sure that they're getting the full 50 feet, which provides the credit to make the pond a little bit smaller.
Okay.
So the condition of approval that staff recommended is pretty rigid. It says that they have to comply with all the requirements of the geotech report dated March 2nd, revised June 15th. In this case, it seems like there's going to be some deviation for that. So maybe as part of your recommendation to council, you could correct staff's recommended condition of approval to include an allowance to say, or as supplemented to the city's satisfaction with the approval of the engineer.
Now, is somebody keeping track of all these things that were?
It's right there in front of you on the mic.
Now it is. Okay,
Just so the mic is on.
I don't know, Todd, if this is the right time to bring that up or not, but going through the staff report on the section 10.04 street and sidewalk grades and curves. Back last year when the city was redoing its road standards, the intent at the time was to ensure that no new driveway construction exceeded 12%. And somehow it mistakenly was got entered and approved at dictating at 12%. And In the staff report here as well, it says heat drive wing grade shall be 12%, and that was not our intent, obviously, the lower the better. How do we correct that in our approval process, or do we need to go back?
So in order to correct a code, we need to do a code revision, but I think discussing that error that exists in code tonight is sufficient for the record.
Very good.
And even though it's a code requirement, it obviously wasn't intended. So that's obviously a mistake in code, and just having a discussion about it, that's all you need to do.
Very good. I would not be the first person to tell you that I was somewhat surprised with the traffic impact analysis. That I believe they were anticipating 1,097 daily trips. And yet no mitigation whatsoever. They don't believe that I think that you're gonna get some pushback from the citizens on Quandong. Or at least the city council is gonna get some pushback, we'll put it that way. And it may obviously bear into future discussions with the annexation folks that want to develop as well, so. Anyway, just thought I'd put that on the record.
Well, and following up on that 9.5 trips per day per dwelling is. That's a good number. It just seems like a lot to me.
Is it 9.5 per? I'd have to double check the traffic report, but yeah, the traffic engineer that did the study, I think it was Heath and Associates. Yeah, they used the 9.5, and that's pretty typical of a single family residential.
Maybe with teenagers.
Well, so there's a manual, the ITE,
Yeah.
the Institute of Traffic Engineers, does studies of land uses, residential, non-residential, commercial, restaurants, banks. And based upon a bunch of data over a lot of different places, they come up with average number of trips each day. Now, the single family, those 10 trips, that could be coming in, it could be going, right? So it could be,
Right.
it could be either way. So if you left and came back, that's 5 times, that's 10 trips.
You know, it never occurred to me until the council meeting that so much traffic leaving Calais Meadows going north to I-5 will undoubtedly use Plamonton. And the folks on the east side of Plamonton are not in the city limits, so I hate to sound crass, but in a sense, that's really not the city's problem, but there will be a lot of traffic. But I don't know what in the world anybody would ever do about that. If
So-
there are people, there's traffic.
In this case, we, because of the SEPA process, a lot of those roads surrounding this are county roads. So the county asked us during the SEPA process to do what's called an agency consultation through the SEPA process so that they could provide input on their roadways and their roadway networks and how they were impacted. They were provided with copies of the transportation analysis as well as copies of everything the applicant had submitted. And they did not take any issue in that process with the lack of off-site road improvements for intersections or functionality or safety. The one thing they did take issue with was the fact that the applicant at that time was not proposing to do frontage improvements along county roads. Because that's not typical. In this case, this isn't a typical situation, so the county through the SEPA process worked with us to come up with SEPA conditions that condition the applicant to build their frontage improvements and to construct the roadways and to construct safe pedestrian access. But as far as the vehicle trip counts went, the county looked at that. They had their engineering staff involved in the conversations along with Mike and I. And they didn't take any issue with the level of service that this subdivision. Needs.
And, there's again, typical standards for intersection controls and the trips that, although it's a large number in total relative to what's there, all the surrounding intersections have a fair bit of capacity, existing capacity. So yes, it's using up some of that existing capacity, but it's not tripping over any adopted thresholds for causing issues or requiring improvements.
Well, that was pretty much the gist that I got from it too, is these roads were built to withstand the traffic. We're not adding so much traffic that it alters our opinion. And therefore the recommendation for no mitigation.
Yeah.
I think. Like I said, we can't look forward to the other subdivisions that may or may not be processed through this agency and so we're dealing with this particular one and we'll take that at face value.
Yeah, the next, developments, they may produce enough traffic that they do push one of those intersections into a capacity deficiency that requires correction, and that next development would then need to do some sort of improvement, whether that's a signal or otherwise to be able to correct that. And that's just, it's the way development occurs. Now, we are, as part of the annexation work, we are doing some analysis of potential impacts of the overall annexation because it's multiple different potential developments, and we'll be providing some information to planning commission and city council about what those impacts might look like and have some thought about how those might be mitigated at some point in the future.
Okay. Getting back to the wastewater treatment plant, there was a detail there for the stormwater. Anyone catch the fact that you're 600 feet off elevation on it? Whereas the details showed an elevations of 868, you're actually
For
at
the wastewater treatment plant?
a wastewater pond.
Stormwater bond.
No, I can certainly look at that. I'm sure that goes back to the.
I'm sure it was a copy and paste detail that used.
Yeah, oh, the
stormwater
actual
control panel.
detail, like the cross section of it, yes, that was off and that has been corrected already,
Okay, very good.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, I got it right here, thank you, though, yeah. Yeah, it's already all marked up.
Well, I had a list of questions 2 weeks ago that was quite lengthy and through the process of going through these documents and
Forgotten one.
pretty much forgot all the others. I think I pretty much,
I'll go back to the traffic impact. So we're saying that because it's the first development. And before the annexation happens. And if the traffic is going towards the 5, it's not going into town, so that's gonna be less traffic down there. And it's just gonna be up to the next development who finally breaks the potential of how many cars are moving through there. I wouldn't be clear about that. Okay.
Typically the way that happens.
Right.
There are times where, if you had a more fully developed transportation plan, so you see a bunch of these developments going on, and maybe as part of the comprehensive plan update that's going to be happening here for the next couple of years, and maybe we want to do a little bit more detailed transportation plan, traffic plan. If we looked at that and said, well, you're going to need, intersection control here, intersection control here, intersection control here, so maybe 3 different either stoplights or roundabouts or whatever control you decided was desirable. You could identify that in your plan. You could conceivably, if you figured that each of these individually was going to be maybe too much for an individual developer to do, you could look to say, well, let's assume that everybody's gonna have to chip in and, develop either a transportation impact fee. Where, everybody would pay $500 a trip or some number, per trip that was introduced to the system. And you collect that and then do those improvements because not one single developer was gonna be able to, or you could also set up a proportionate share type contribution. Again, similar where each developer would need to provide a proportionate share of their impact to that intersection.
Okay.
So there are some mechanisms to try to not have a single intersection improvement stop all development from happening.
Yeah, sure.
But that'll be a little bit more, we'll start to see some of that figured out a little bit more as we're doing this annexation traffic impact
I
analysis.
imagine we will.
And then we'll determine whether that makes sense to move that forward as part of maybe the comprehensive plan work.
Okay, thank you.
Dan,
Okay.
how about you?
I'm good.
Just one question. We've talked a lot about where we are now as far as the plans are concerned, and there are items in the staff report that are conditions of approval that call for resubmittals. Let's take the park, for instance. The park expanded in size from 7,000 to 117,000 square feet. I believe the code has with regards to playground equipment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When those submittals are made as to the type of equipment and the schematics of the park, where are they gonna go? Are they gonna go to the city engineer for approval? Will they come back to us? Will they go to city council?
So it's a staff review, so assuming you make a recommendation of approval, subject to the conditions discussed tonight and others, after taking public testimony and carefully considering all of that. Then you're done with this application. Unless you put something in as a condition of approval that you want specific approval over those things and have to bring them back to planning commission. You could do that as a condition of approval if you want to see some specifics on those items, but typically that doesn't happen. You condition it generally with the conditions of approval that are in there. If the conditions of approval aren't specific enough, then you can specify we want this type of park equipment or we want this. But generally what happens after this point is your recommendation goes to council. Council gets another swipe at it to make sure that they approve of your recommendation. They can make additional changes, or they could even deny it with your recommendation, or they could approve it with your recommendation for denial. So they can accept your recommendation, reject it completely, or modify it as their options. Once it gets approved by council, then it's all up to staff to go through and review to make sure that they're meeting the conditions of approval and that they've implemented all of the requirements that we put on them.
Okay, I'm not trying to give us more work to do, but that's the last thing I want to do.
Council does get final acceptance though at the end, before they can record either a phase of it, before they can record the final plat and sell lots. Then council gets to approve the final plat and accept the dedications, and with that will be the as-built and a letter from the engineer saying it's constructed to meet standards, and a letter from me saying that they've met the planning conditions.
Okay, maybe I'm beating a dead horse and I'm not trying to, where I'm going with that is, let's say, just in the instance of the park. Who gets to look at that once you've determined, okay, this is a guy that we've used a lot as far as the supplier. This is what we propose for your park as far as amenities and children's play, et cetera, et cetera. Is it the city council or staff that's going to review that?
It's staff unless you specify otherwise.
If you want to do it, you're welcome to it.
But that is part of what staff will do, is they'll review and approve the construction plans and the landscaping plans and everything that goes with that. That's staff's approval. If there are elements in the park that you want to see, your code doesn't have a lot of specific requirements, then you'd have to make those conditions of approval as part of your discussion tonight.
Well, I know one of the recommendations from the engineering side was with regard to the MSE walls. And I'd like to find out what they intended to use as a substitute for that. I was not a fan of having GeoGrid anywhere near my roadways or my sidewalks. And once again, having been down that road so many times in my career, I kind of want to look and see what they have anticipated, and then I don't want to put the burden on you to have to investigate what I already know. And don't know how do I perform that.
Well, so the thing is that you could, there's a couple of things you can do. If you feel like you don't have enough information tonight, make affirmative findings that the application meets code, then you could continue the public hearing and ask the applicant to come back and present details on any number of those items that you may have questions on. That's one of your options. The other option is you could put a condition of approval in there that on these elements, they have to be reviewed and approved by planning commission prior to or staff review. We could just circulate a comment by you for your input too.
That would be sufficient.
I don't think that would be.
I think that would be sufficient.
Yeah.
We could just get your
we
input on that.
We did include within our report a comment regarding that wall.
Right, I saw that.
Didn't want that to be an MSC wall, it needed to be something different, and there are multiple different choices that they could provide besides an MSC wall. And I agree with your your concern, and it's just very difficult if we ever have to go back and do anything in the roadway section, you know, fix a water line, a sewer line, a storm line, whatever, and you've got geogrids in the way. So I don't know what you might intend, but there's multiple different ways to solve that problem that don't involve the geogrids on MSC wall.
And I just want to be clear though, that once you all make your recommendation tonight, unless you put a condition in there that says you get to review it again, then you won't.
I'm not sure that, number one, I don't think we want to slow the process. That's not our intention. We want to make sure it's done right. But you know, at this point in time, I think they're fine with where they are along the path. If there's going to be further review by yourself, and you could include planning for review, I would make that recommendation. And then the city council can act in the manner it chooses to.
Yeah, that's just part of the process. There's no condition that's needed for further staff review.
Okay.
We're responsible to review that and find that it complies with this before we can issue construction plan approval, but.
I don't have any more questions. Dan? Brian? Tom?
No, I'm really confident.
Time for public input?
Yes, sir.
Could I please make sure that you put on the record three of the audience members that we have tonight?
Yes, I just wanted to put on the record that 3 of the audience members we have tonight are from the Toledo City Council. However, they are not here to do business and are sitting far apart from each other and do not constitute a quorum. Anybody from the public wish to speak?
I do.
Council.
I have a question about light dampening for light pollution. Because you have a city above and a city down below. And so I'm wondering if that will
That's in every report.
affect the light shining down from above to the city down below. And the street lights and how that will be affecting our citizens down below. And so I know that there are street dampening or light dampening devices for light pollution, and I would like to look into those. Because I live
I
downtown.
believe they were addressed in staff report, so could I get one of you to answer, talk on that?
I didn't see it.
I thought I did.
A couple times.
Yeah, I saw
I
something
saw
about
that.
it.
It is an element in the SEPA checklist. That the applicant completes as part of the process. They have to talk about lighting, and I was just pulling up the SEPA checklist to see what they said. And that gets circulated out to state agencies for any input and public comments, as well as tribes and other people that are on our SEPA distribution list. But just because nobody commented during SEPA doesn't mean it can't be something that planning commission could consider. So your public testimony is relevant.
And I don't recall within my
Hmm.
review, anything specific, other than there was streetlights being provided.
Right, I know there was a thing about placement of the street light.
Right, but there's not necessarily, unfortunately, city doesn't have
Might
very specific
What?
standards for those.
development that we
That's almost a benefit to this situation. I think that if there's not a specific requirement of how far apart the streetlights would need to be, I mean, we can look into the dampening, but. I wouldn't expect there to be too much of an impact based on the SEPA findings. I mean, nobody commenting on it. Did we decide on a requirement for the street lighting?
I mean, I think it was just when speaking with Public Works, they were more comfortable with just a standard aluminum Cobra head streetlight. Streetlights, that situation, shine down. You can get shrouds on certain, facets of them that prevent light from going a certain direction. But usually, with that Cobra head style, it's all coming down in a beam. So it's not, you don't generally have a lot of loss going upward, it's almost all down.
Right.
And so the only real control on that, I think, is typically if you've got a residence that's right here and you can put a shroud that keeps this beam from going out like that, and it goes further straight down. But I'm not sure there's a lot more that can be done on that style of streetlight to provide much impact or benefit, a mile away.
Well, it's not a mile, it's like right here and we're right down here, so I'm just wondering how much light pollution that we're gonna get from, I mean, it's just, it's just a question I have, but the fellow the other night was saying, express our concerns, so it's a concern of mine. And then the parks, were another concern of mine. And I believe that it seems to me that since we have a small parks department with 5 volunteers, they should choose the layout of the park for future parks. Seems like that would be a plan.
So right now, what the applicant has proposed is an outlot, and that isn't proposed to be dedicated to the city as a park. So that won't be a park that the city owns and maintains unless sometime in the future, and it would have to be council that would agree to accept the park. And at the point when the applicant wanted to dedicate that to the city, that's something that they would have to do because only council has the authority to accept that property. And at that point, council could say as a condition of acceptance, we want you to provide these things before we'll take it and maintain it from here on out.
Okay.
Or planning commission could condition the applicant, as we were talking, to have other reviewers review and approve elements if that's a necessary piece. So as a possible solution to your public testimony, that's something that planning commission will have to consider along with your concern about lighting.
Okay. And I think that was about it. You had addressed my other concerns earlier about the lot size and the traffic study. The traffic study was a concern of mine because it was done during COVID. And it seemed quite unrealistic to me. Living on Kilondon Road, I think it's gonna be laughable. And
I'm not sure COVID had anything to do with their findings though, Emily, because. They based it on a certain number of trips within the subdivision, which would be COVID or no COVID. And what its impact on the existing streets would be, so. I don't know that COVID entered in as a factor.
well, it seemed like they didn't do it with residents involved, like future residents weren't involved in the traffic study. That's what I read.
I think they're just they're studying data. I don't think they actually clicked cars.
Yeah.
No, as part of the traffic study, they did look at existing traffic, so they did traffic counts at various intersections.
Then it would be.
And then they
Okay.
tried to all traffic studies that have been done in the last couple of years have had to try to make some correction. And so, sometimes folks have made, adjustments. Will say, well, maybe it was 10% less than otherwise would have, depending on, on what the situation was. But they try and make some adjustment if they took counts that were during this COVID period. Then they will typically project traffic that's happening around the development. So, we'll call it background growth. And they'll project it with some percentage growth rate. I can't remember exactly what the percentage growth rate was right off the top of my head, but they'll project that, and they'll also look at with that projected background growth rate and traffic from the development. So, I do think they try to make, some correction for it. It's an estimate, because you can't know what would have happened if the pandemic happened. But they've tried to make some correction of the data that they have.
But was it, it seemed like it wasn't done with was it done with the houses?
Yeah. So it's written without proposed development.
Okay.
And including background growth either way.
Okay, I read it without.
And that's one of the analyses they do, and the one with.
Okay.
And the report is a little segmented, so you probably saw the study of the data that was collected without the development, and then they go into the rest of the report, they kind of compare without the development and with the development, and it goes up to 2027 to kind of look at that of what the impact is from the development.
And actually, as I'm looking at the report here, the field data was collected in May of 2022. So that really was, we were really getting more out of the COVID issue at that point. So this one didn't include a COVID correction. But I have seen a couple in the last couple of years that we tried to make some correction.
Any further public comment?
Yes,
Yes.
Cindy Campo, resident. There hasn't been much discussion about the whole pedestrian access from the development down to what we're calling Old Toledo. Could somebody describe a little bit more of what that plan is?
I actually was gonna ask for clarification on that. So the developer is planning on constructing pedestrian access as part of the frontage improvements. There'll be pedestrian trail along Toledo Vader. And then I think the question is, how far does that need to extend? The staff report did say to Fifth, so all the way down to Fifth. Originally, I believe, the developer was under the impression it was just going to 7th, so that bringing that all the way down to Fifth is a little bit, well, it's a little bit more of a significant impact as you just even coming in, you can see it's to get a sidewalk all the way through, there's gonna be a challenge. However, the developer is obviously willing to work with the city. We do want to provide that access and make sure that there is safe access from the development to downtown, so.
So the requirement is, as part of a SEPA mitigation measure. It was required as part of the SEPA publication to provide for a 5-foot wide pedestrian passage with sufficient separation from the vehicle travel lanes to provide pedestrian safety acceptable to Lewis County and the city of Toledo. The pedestrian path shall be provided along Toledo Vader Road from the project site to North Fifth Street. And that was part of the SEPA determination.
Right.
And let me see, we also had a comment from Lewis County that was submitted as part of the SEPA that we're incorporating into the staff findings. And that was comments. Lewis County. So Lewis County. I thought they had comments on that through our SEPA consultation, but that didn't make it into their formal SEPA comment. So if there's a difference, then it would have come out of something in the engineering conditions that I may have had to base it, otherwise it's just, it's fifth is what the requirement is in the SEPA. So if the staff report says something different, we should definitely clarify that tonight as to what your intent is as you make your recommendation.
Well, I remember seeing it was supposed to go to North Fifth. And that pretty well hooks it up to town, right? Yeah.
So I think maybe if after the close of public testimony, if you all could talk about that a little bit and see what the intent is and make clarification about what the requirement is to forward that on to council with your recommendation.
And then I have a second question. I don't know how appropriate it is for this particular hearing. But it's been talked about at the annexation level, the next series of developments about variety of housing profiles. Is this development just the lots are on the open market and develop, whoever buys that lot has their choice of homes to be built? How does that work?
So we've worked with this developer in the past and they have not done it that way. They will pick anywhere between 2 and 4 styles of homes. And then residents interested in buying the lot can either pick their style of home. So they've done it different ways. You can buy the lot and then pick the home style, or they will just put those 4 homes on all across the development and then sell them as is. I don't know exactly what they intend to do with this development yet, but we can certainly find out.
Thank you.
So we can have a model complex, which would give a representation of the,
I would have to ask them about that, likely. I can't recall what they did with the last development in Lindlock, but I can certainly check.
it looked like that.
Yeah.
Did I ask your question, Cindy? Or
It
was it-
did. I mean, I said, I don't know how appropriate it is at this point, but cookie cutter houses that are the same all the way down a block is not overly interesting. But it's also, it happens a lot. So I just wanted to throw it out there.
Yes, sir.
Eric Hayes, resident. Those mics are fantastic, you probably need all 3 of them on. I'm confused about the park and the outlot B at 117,000 square feet. Is there a park or is there an outlot?
It will be a park, that is part of the requirements for the development. It's just that it's not, as Todd was saying, we're not dedicating it to the city, then that was mostly due to maintenance. So right now it's shown as an outlot because it's not gonna be developed as a home, it will be a park.
Okay.
And staff had preliminary conversations with the applicant about that. I think they were willing to dedicate it to the city, and we indicated at this point, the city probably wasn't willing to accept that as a dedication just because of the maintenance and obligation and right now the city's lack of extra public works folks to go out and maintain and take care of it. So we've given the applicant the impression that the city's not willing, but if at the time when they present this to council, they decide something different, or at a later date, they can always dedicate it to the city.
Well, when we have all this new development, we're rolling in money and we have a parks department that can take care of all of these lands, then we'd be pretty happy to take care of that. I guess that brings up the other issue with maintenance would be the storm detention pond. And I know there have been varying opinions on who should look after that. My opinion, based on the fact that you are releasing water onto your own property, that you should take the maintenance of that and hold it for at least a period of time. Staff have a different idea on that?
I have seen in other places where the cities have required the developer to hold on to the stormwater on track and maintain it. that you can have homeowners associations that are tasked with that responsibility that struggle to do that correctly.
Mhm.
And ultimately ends up going into disrepair and not functioning correctly, causing issues, and then the city ends up being begged to come and clean it up, fix it up. And the city comes and does that, even though it's not necessarily their responsibility, and it's a headache because it's on private property and they've got to take care of it. Now, it's a common conundrum, particularly for smaller communities without a lot of resources and staff, about how to deal with that. An option, and this is more of a bigger picture option, is some communities have gone ahead and created a stormwater utility. So you essentially can connect, charge a fee for lots that have some impervious surface on them that are generating stormwater, and city can collect that fee, and that can go towards maintaining stormwater ponds or improving areas that have stormwater problems, flooding or capacity issues.
Well, I like that idea. I mean, I could see requiring them to maintain it for, let's say, a period of 3 years after following completion of the project or something like that, providing funds to make sure that the maintenance gets done. But in the long run, until the city gets developed to the point where there are actually funds in the coffer to pay for these things, it might not be a bad idea to make a storm collection. Albeit however small, but to get a pool of money so that there can be maintenance done on the base.
Yeah, and that's a bigger picture thought discussion that probably needs to be discussed with council,
Right.
but it's not an easy decision, and I'm not sure honestly what's the best thing to do in this type of situation, because it's difficult for a small city without a lot of resources right now to maintain that. But I can see there being a reasonable likelihood in 5, 10, 20-year period where it goes into disrepair because it's not being maintained by an HOA, a small HOA particularly. So choices might be to require the developer to maintain it, to hold on to it and maintain it. And that's gonna be the homeowners association responsibility to do so. And one mechanism you can do is you can require them to have a maintenance plan and to follow that, and then you as the city have the right to review that and inspect it. The second thing you could do, choice, would be to say, well, that lot should get dedicated to the city and the city will maintain it. You could also conceivably, if you chose to do that, say, as part of that, we want the developer to provide some funding to maintain it for the first 5, 10 years. So, a certain amount of funds, $500 a year, $1,000 a year or something to maintain it. So that's also a choice.
I think that's probably gonna be a council decision.
It could be added to council, or you could add that as a recommendation
Yeah.
tonight. I think staff's recommendation was that, do you remember, because we're not requiring them to be dedicated.
No.
So they were all gonna be private facilities. So part of the recommendation that's in there tonight is that they not be dedicated. All right. Well, actually, we just didn't require that they are dedicated. We didn't say that they couldn't be. We just didn't require them to be.
Yeah.
So if you want to alter that, tonight is your opportunity to do that, to add a condition of approval.
Well, I would word it somewhere along the lines that they're responsible for maintenance until closeout of the project when they disappear.
Yeah.
And then they provide funding for the first 5 years following their exit. And hopefully at the end of that 5 years, we have staff capable of taking on that burden.
So requiring them to dedicate it after completion of the subdivision, the final phase.
Well, if we're gonna work on it, we better own it.
And then
piece.
require them to provide a funding mechanism to some industry standard
That makes sense.
for a period of 5 years or 3 years or whatever.
Makes a lot of sense.
Is there an HOA in play? in
I
this
don't think so.
development?
There's not one, but by leaving it in the responsibility of the developer, either the developer of the project has to maintain it in perpetuity, or their option is they can set up an HOA and turn over the responsibility to them.
And we're really trying to avoid that, I think. At least my position is I'm trying to avoid requiring them to set up an HOA for something like that.
In this type of basin, you might be able to back this up or agree that there's not a lot of maintenance, so it's pretty typical, like, you had just said. The developer is gonna maintain the basin until everything is established, especially because of the erosion and sediment, you never really know. If something's gonna get in there and you gotta dig it out before you finalize all the grading and vegetation's established. After that, so this is just a wet basin, so a lot of times the maintenance, there's not much to do outside of maybe taking some like debris out of an outlet structure. Outside of like dredging a wet pond, which is usually every 10 to 20 years, so.
The other thing that does happen is kind of the vegetation maintenance, because you'll get. You
Yeah.
know, trees and shrubs and bushes growing in there that can hamper its effectiveness. And so-
This is gonna be lined, right?
Yes, it
So
will
we
be.
don't want trees and bushes growing roots to our lining, do we? No.
So I mean,
Or all the pipes that are going from the.
those are the types of maintenance we're talking about is removal of sediment at some point in the future, and then maintaining the vegetation. Those are the types of things that you have to do.
So in terms of the condition you're thinking about after it gets turned, after the project is completed. You would be looking for, you said about 5 years of funds from the developer
Correct,
for that maintenance.
right. Which is probably pretty minimal, but it still need to be addressed.
What if the developer were billed for that 5-year period? When
What if they would?
billed? City could bill them if there was some maintenance, to do, if there was some repair or work to do, and the city actually did it. Then the city could bill the developer for that expense.
Well, that would be true if you had to go and maintain a private. So if you don't require them to dedicate it and you don't do anything and the HOA doesn't. Then you could send the HOA a bill for city time, or the developer, whoever's responsible for that tract, you could send. If you go in and you maintain private property with city resources and there's no contract in place to do that or no agreement, then you can send them a bill for staff time. It's unusual that happens because those almost never get paid, but yeah, collection on those would be very.
And that's the issue with the billing. piece, is that if you bill somebody 4 or 5 years out, who knows whether that'll be paid. So if you're gonna set up some arrangement, usually you would say, okay, at final plat, we estimate that it's gonna be $500 a year to maintain this, or whatever the number is, and, provide a chapter bond for that.
Okay,
I don't think this is the tipping point.
Is that, the $500 a year, yeah, might not be, and if I think that we would request that it be part of the bond, can it be part of that 15% bond to avoid additional funds from the developer? Can it just be rolled into
If
that?
your bond expires after 2 years.
Years. I mean, so that, and then it's a question of duration, right? And
Sure.
if we're looking at a typical maintenance bond for a subdivision, it's gonna be 2 years. And I doubt that you're gonna wanna hang on to the full subdivision bond for 5. Although I guess maybe you could word the bond so that the stormwater maintenance piece was for a period of 5 years, or provide a separate maintenance bond for the stormwater.
And so then the plan would be after that, then where would the maintenance go
Well,
to?
it'd be the city. I mean, so
The
I
city would
think
then
what
be-
we're talking about is perhaps having that track dedicated to the city.
Yeah,
Giving the city some means to, maintain that for that first, 4 or 5 years. And then after that, you're hoping that the city's gonna have enough resources to be able to maintain that for perpetuity.
And who would estimate what I think that fee would be?
I mean, I think it's the combination of you, me, and the public works department.
Yeah.
Get back to normal.
So if you're gonna add a condition of approval, then maybe the condition of approval is to require the dedication of those stormwater facilities to the city and require a developer to post a 5-year maintenance bond or payment agreeable to the director of public works and city engineers.
Can I question?
Yep. I think we
Okay.
just did. So.
Any-
Yeah, sorry.
Any further public comment? Joe? Yeah, yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering if we will also be, asking to require, the dedication of the park for further, down the road as well. I think we're gonna do it. I mean, all the other parks in town are public.
It's on public property and this is on private property.
Was that your question? Just should this
Yeah.
be dedicated to the public as a
Yes.
public tract as part of?
That seems like something. We don't have the funds to support it right now. I mean, are you looking at the same situation where now you're trying to form an HOA because you gotta maintain the park?
Essentially, yes, that would be just another item to try to figure out how we would privately maintain it and who and where we would get those funds, which does point to an HOA.
Well, that would make sense, because it's the residents of College Meadows. And their children that are going to use the park, and an HOA would address that. Whereas city would just be butting their noses in. Here, let us clean your park. We don't need to do that anyway.
Is it a gated community?
No.
Anybody can.
No, and with the pedestrian access, yeah, I would think that, I mean, it is a public, I mean. Anybody could
Has
use
public
it.
access.
Yeah, it's public access.
So if an HOA didn't form and the park went into disrepair. Then what would happen?
Then your streets are in disrepair and sidewalks and.
Well, I think the city's gonna be dedicated to streets and so
Sidewalks are dedicated to the city.
they're dedicated to the city.
But if the park goes into disrepair, then the city could take legal action against the HOA if they exist. Or against the homeowners collectively, and then you'd have to maintain it, or you could maintain it if there was political pressure to do that, but most likely it would just fall into disrepair and it would continue to grow and be weeds and bramble and whatnot.
Emily,
Quite
will-
familiar with it.
Get
will an
the
HOA be
vision
encouraged?
of Brooklyn, you know.
I do not think that it would be something that the developer would necessarily want to go through. There's a lot of work and upfront legal fees getting HOAs formed and getting the documents drafted. And then there's a lot that goes into just selling homes as part of an HOA. So I think that if we can avoid it, that would be the preference we would request, to try to get the stormwater in the park left.
Well, then the only alternative would be to put the same stipulation on the park as we did on the storm detention basin. Which is that you maintain it until you leave town and then you provide a bond or cash payment in order to facilitate maintenance for a period of time.
Emily, it sounded like you were about to say something about 2 minutes back when they started talking about it. Did you have an idea or?
I don't know, I make that. Oh, that's what I was thinking, and I didn't say because we're not necessarily going down the HOA path, but I was gonna bring up the maintenance agreement. A lot of times with ponds and parks, if you're concerned about it not being maintained. Sometimes HOAs will have a, like a city, that if it's not maintained, the city will maintain it and then charge the HOA, but because we're not.
You know, that puts us on the onus of being bill collectors and the bad guys, and I don't think the city wants to be the bad guys or the bill collector. I think if we put it upon the developer. Prior to leaving town, that they provide for that. Maintenance. Then it gets done, it's paid for, and everybody's happy.
So something similar.
Similar to the maintenance, to the detention basin.
Yeah.
And I think you'd be the first person to be able to give us a handle on how much that costs every month to maintain, if you're going to be maintaining it. For the phases that you're doing.
Well, I would also guess that a dedication to the city can happen down the road as well, correct? And you could be putting these stipulations in place, but you know, as everyone gets familiar and learns more, you know, the city may come to the developer saying, hey, I think we could probably handle this. And was there a dedication process at that point?
Well, I think that's why we're limiting the amount of time that they're gonna be on the hook for it, is because we're gonna come to a push shove moment where we have to.
Yeah, when that agreement ends, then it would be dedicated at the end.
Right.
Of this 5 year.
So what you're recommending for the stormwater is slightly different from the recommendation for the park.
Yes,
So the
or
stormwater tracks, we're gonna require they be dedicated with the final phase of the plat,
right.
and they become city property. The park will also get dedicated with the final phase of the plat with the maintenance bond, or is that
No, I think at the end of the maintenance bond.
at the end of the maintenance bond it gets dedicated? Well then, so what's the purpose of the?
Is that
maintenance
right?
bond?
I think you said it right.
You said it right?
But then the maintenance.
It's up to you.
would Be,
It's up to the four of you.
Well, I'm trying to,
I'm trying to summarize what I'm hearing, and I want to be sure it's correct and in the record, because I'm gonna have to write these down into the recommendations as they get forwarded to council, so. I'm just trying to make sure that your recommendation is clear, because.
well, it's gonna come to push or shove either way, so I don't know if there's any real difference in.
And
the two, and you might as well dedicate the park at the same time you dedicate the basin. You're providing the funding for the first few years of maintenance anyway. If the city's gonna do that maintenance, we might as well work on what we own. And do both at the same time.
So
the
5
same
years for
condition
the
as
pond
the-
and 5 years for the park.
No, at the time of. Dedication of the final plat, right?
When they record the final plat of the last phase of development, they would dedicate the storm facility. And provide for a maintenance bond for a period of 5 years.
Right,
At that same time, on the recording of the final plat for the final phase, they would also dedicate the park, it's identified as the outlot tract, to the city with a maintenance bond for a period of 5 years.
makes sense.
Is that,
Sounds good.
Yes. It is different,
Good summary.
and yeah, thank you, John.
I'm just trying to convey what I'm
No, no,
hearing you
that was
all
good.
say.
Yeah.
That's good.
So
Ability
that
to-
will be clear in the recommendations to council.
Any further comments? Think we're ready to close this meeting, or did you want to make some comments?
I have 2 items I would like to discuss. So jumping to the very beginning, when Todd was talking about the lots being within the wetland buffer. And how the SEPA addressed that there were gonna be no impacts to the wetland buffer area. However, there are 2 lots that the lot lines just barely cross the wetland buffer area. So our understanding and what we've done in previous cities is to keep the minimum lot size, which is 6,000 square feet, the lots can have extended into the buffer, and then we place an easement over that buffer area. So that essentially it's still untouched. We don't grade within there, it's not impacted. In the past, we've posted signs that say like wetland buffer area, easement, don't mow. Or even a fence, so, that is just something that I wanted to state, that it's still an untouched area. I'm not sure if there's anything else I should elaborate on with that. But it's still just something I wanted to mention, as it seemed like a concern of Todd's that the SEPA had stated there wouldn't be impacts. There still will not be impacts. It would just be a covenant over that area on the lot. And then the last item, so going back to the sidewalk. I have some concerns, so in the SEPA stating that the sidewalk would go all the way to Fifth. I believe the developer, we were under the impression it was gonna go to Fifth. So I have some concerns about the cost that it would be to get from, 7th to 5th. For the construction of that sidewalk or that pedestrian access. I would think that the goal would be, as more work happens between Fifth and downtown, that then those improvements could be made. One at a time versus our Red Rock providing that trail all the way to downtown. I understand it is a condition of approval. We will talk to the client about it and take a look at everything, but I did want to mention that that's a pretty expensive project to take all the way to get through that wetland area and then also continue it downtown.
7 isn't really a street, it's a driveway.
It's like,
It's
yeah.
an alley.
It's a driveway.
Yeah, it was, to us, the challenging part was getting through that wetland area, that bridge. So we thought if we could get across there, take it to that driveway area, then, the future parcel would provide the next trail. Sort of like frontage improvements, right? You provide your frontage improvement adjacent to your.
In this sense,
property.
I don't disagree with your concern over the cost. I'm just, from a public relations standpoint, you're gonna look like bad guys. If you do that, because it's gonna say, well, they did the minimum possible, they came down to 7th. And then they cut it off and now our kids are walking in the mud. And so you might want to talk to your developer about that, and because that's gonna be the public reaction.
Your kids are gonna have a sidewalk to walk on,
Sure.
and all those kids are gonna be walking from uphill, downhill, and you're gonna make them walk in the mud. School. What kind of people are you? That's what you're gonna get.
So just to clarify, I believe the applicant is just asking you all, because you have the ability to accept staff's recommendation, change it or not accept. I believe what the applicant's asking is that you modify staff's recommendation in this case to change those two things.
Yeah.
Did I
Yeah,
summarize that
would be-
correctly?
We would request that instead of the sidewalk or pedestrian, I don't even know that it's specifically a sidewalk, but pedestrian access all the way down to Fifth, we would request that it ends. Just past the wetland, essentially at the driveway at 7.
Do we know how that confusion happened? Like, how come you guys thought you were going to Fifth?
No, I don't think there's a confusion.
I don't- yeah.
I think, we felt like it was necessary to get them to Fifth.
Okay,
Yeah.
Developer doesn't necessarily feel like
I hear you.
they need to get him to Fifth, they feel like getting him to 7th is adequate. It's a-
Take them to bed.
It's a difference of opinion based upon,
Yeah,
their perspective versus our perspective.
right.
And you all get to hear it all, make a recommendation.
Okay,
So though, I think.
so you
that's
had
the
two
only
issues, you had the
items.
wetland buffer and you had the sidewalk issue.
Yes,
Okay, and I don't have really concerns on the wetlands buffer area. And you can. Once we close the meeting, we'll discuss this amongst ourselves here and decide what we're gonna do.
Well, again, from a citizen perspective, I mean, it sounds like a negotiation point, and there might be a happy medium.
Right.
That can be reached, but we're not standing out there and kind of getting context and
right.
perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely don't want to just have something end where then somebody has to walk on the street. That wouldn't be the goal. More so just a question of this project, and you mentioned a tipping point and, The developers were already significantly less number of lots than we had anticipated with that wetland, a majority of the site being wetland. And so just kind of thinking through. There's quite a bit of significant public infrastructure improvements happening with the development already between the water and sewer and the frontage improvements. All of which are very expensive and, you know, quite worth it. I think the developer's really excited to be coming to Toledo and providing this opportunity. It's at this point just a matter of sort of that tipping point and what can they actually afford. And looking at that, I think there's options we can look at versus just ending it, but also not necessarily taking a full sidewalk right through that whole downtown area.
Now, isn't some of the infrastructure kind of charted forward? I mean, isn't you're recouping some of that initial infrastructure costs on future developments and developers? No, I thought there was a discussion at one point about that sort of thing.
Right now, the developer is paying for all of that.
What's the distance between 7th and 5th?
Couple blocks.
This is what I got, so probably the same thing you're looking at, here's 7. Here's
It's 500 feet down to that Ramsey lot where the gravel is.
Yeah, and then as you get more, obviously, as you get more into downtown, there's just more. There's more infrastructure there that you would need to be working through to construct. A
Versus,
sidewalk.
slab on grade sidewalk?
If that's what we were to install. I think the condition calls for 5 feet of separation between
Traffic and.
traffic.
So they're good.
We're talking about residents there.
Yeah, right.
Here.
What's that?
Yeah.
You are gonna
You're
impact
gonna
residents
impact
between 6
lots.
and 7.
Right.
So you're gonna need, well, where's the right of way on that? Is there an easement
I
there?
don't think the condition says it's separated 5 feet, it's a 5-foot
A 5
separated path, so it's 5-foot path that's somehow separated from traffic. Now that separation can be horizontal.
Okay.
It can be vertical, right? So you put in a curve that's separated from traffic, right?
Right.
Or it could be on the bridge. Right, or it can be separated horizontally. So I think that's prescriptive already, you know, or it's subjective.
Yeah,
So
Well, and I think it also comes back to intent. I think the dangerous point in all of this is that hill down Toledo Vader. And the separation
Right.
of traffic there is imperative.
right.
But, you know, once you're into, you know, the more calm.
The 25 mile an hour zone?
Or once you hit 6th,
Or once you hit-
once you hit 6th, you're kind of, you could walk south.
there is more, certainly there's more shoulder there. Once you get.
But there are options there.
Right.
This
And
is pretty sketch.
yeah, once
Yes,
you
it
get to downtown, I mean, there even seems like there is walking area.
Yeah.
So it doesn't appear that there's too much aside from. I don't, it seems like there's walking area once you get downtown. It's not a sidewalk per se.
There is walking area.
Yeah,
It just is pretty sketchy coming up.
yeah. It just kind of comes back to, I think that definitely the
Yeah,
developers
Google Maps.
want to make sure there's safe options, as part of this development. There's just a lot of public infrastructure also being installed as part of this, and it's a lot. It's been a lot of asks for the development, and it's kind of request that you guys consider that, and maybe reconsider the sidewalk request all the way down. That's all I have.
Yeah, we can close the public meeting. Now we can start talking amongst ourselves. Um. See, having been on that side of the show. I know that when the market's really good and you raise the price of your house $20,000 because that's what the market will bear. That goes, doesn't come back to us. And you get what you can get when you can get it, as long as it pencils out. And you know, they're telling us that this might be the tipping point. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Tom?
You know what? I would like to. I'd like to drive up there, not now, of course, but I'd like to drive up there and actually see what it looks like to get off a sidewalk that would be built at 7th. And see what that's like then to walk along 7th.
In the middle of winter.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Push the
middle of
stroller
winter,
to the park.
Yeah, I mean, I can't visualize it. I think I know where this is, kind of. Well, it's, yeah, I think I know where it is. But I've never paid attention to the street number. But I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it and imagine myself a kid walking to school from Calix Meadows.
We'll be here. You want to go?
Well, pardon?
You want to go? We'll be here.
Good. I mean, somebody said something about a point.
That's 7th.
Is that after the bridge?
Yeah, that's 7th right there on the side.
Right.
Yeah, it's just a little driveway right after the bridge.
And so the significant infrastructure expenses that you guys are taking on, you're talking about the sewer and power coming up.
Yeah, there's
Sewer
water, sewer, I believe. There's a pump station.
Right.
They're also installing a pump station, and then as part of the SEPA. There's another large fee, I think it's 30,000 for the police and fire.
Yeah.
And then there will be school impact fees with every building.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's
Oh, yeah, significant, yeah, for sure.
very significant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
As is the impact.
Yeah,
And so I didn't mean to interrupt you, so then this gets back to my last traffic question. So when the next development comes in, they're gonna only have to bring the sewer and water a much shorter distance than you guys had to bring it.
correct. They'll bring it to their, wherever
Exactly.
they need to get.
Right, and then that's why we can say, oh, well, now you gotta put a stoplight in, because the first guys didn't really hit that level, but now you guys are too. And then how appropriate, I guess is the word I'm asking, is it to I guess ask them to finish the sidewalk. Or combine the infrastructure improvements and according to some design. So say if it was, and I'm just talking here.
Okay.
So if they don't wanna go all the way down to 5th. But they are bringing the power and they're bringing all the infrastructure up. Do we divvy up the? And we
Well,
want.
I don't know. I think the main constraints that she talked about, Mike addressed already, and looking down that street, I mean. The separation doesn't have to be 5 feet from the edge of traffic way. So. I mean, essentially it looks like some grubbing and clearing, some fill, some compaction and a slab on grade sidewalk would get you there. That doesn't seem to be such a financial burden. That we shouldn't request that the sidewalk go to 5th.
I agree with them. If it's not significant. Per se. If it works too.
I mean, do you understand where I'm coming from? I mean,
Yeah.
we're not talking about you having to go into somebody's house and deal with all the utilities that don't exist anyway.
Right.
My inclination is to leave it the requirement as it is.
Okay.
That's just my opinion. There are 4 of us here.
Yeah.
Dan?
My sense is the same.
You want to go look?
we can, we can make the recommendation to council and they can say, hey, wait a minute. What about?
Well, council gets to override us on anything we do here. I mean,
Exactly.
it's their prerogative, so.
Exactly.
It's not set in stone. We can make the recommendation, but. That doesn't seem like a hill to die on one way or the other, and I'd prefer that the sidewalk made it all the way to the intersection myself.
I prefer that too.
Is the idea there that the future developments that come in, being the annexation ones, would be the ones to potentially take on that?
Correct, any development or redevelopment that would occur, then you would trigger, that lot would then trigger those frontage improvements. By the city, which would include a sidewalk.
Do we have allowances for redevelopment? We don't even have a redevelopment agency. So
Yeah.
that's gonna be sold as a single family residence home.
As
when it's
part of
built.
a permit pulled, right? Like if somebody pulls a permit to do some sort of renovation on that lot, then you're.
That's a big ask.
It-
Now,
it is-
for a homeowner, that would be a big ask. Okay, can you extend 200 feet of sidewalk, please, along your property line on that?
Are there homes right along there?
There's two homes.
There too.
Between Sixth and Fifth.
Okay,
So typically, as part of the building permit review process, we wouldn't require them to improve. Those as part of a renovation or part of a remodel or an addition. But if they built a new home, or we do have an instance downtown where they're talking about.
Right.
Developing a number of downtown lots, and we are requiring them to do sidewalks around their development.
Right?
And in that case too, we're also through the building permit asking them to provide passage to the park property or school property that's right next door. So, I mean, those are typical requirements for a building permit when you're building a new building or redeveloping a block. But as part of a remodel, we don't typically require them to do road or frontage improvements.
Well, my comment from earlier still stands, though. I think that the city council has the option to overturn or modify anything that we do here anyway. And they can certainly be another stepping along as far as making your case. Since they'll have the final say so. So I think at this point in
So
time,
one of the things that you could do, because if you make a recommendation one way or the other. Then that's a fairly affirmative finding, and council may put some weight to your recommendation. If you have some question. It's uncommon, but I've seen it done before where you make no recommendation and leave it up to council.
I don't think they're looking for that though, Todd. I really
Typically
don't.
not, but I think that's definitely something you could basically be stuck, right? You're 2-2, but if you're all in agreement that you can't really make a good decision about it. Because it involves a broader policy issue, then you could choose on that item. You could forward this with a recommendation and then kind of withhold your recommendation on that one item and let council decide it. But you're right, Chair, that's unusual for planning commission to do that.
yeah, and if I could add, I don't know necessarily that it's. Like you said, it's not that significant, right, from a big picture perspective of all the things that are being done. I don't know offhand how much those construction costs are gonna be. I think that when we talk about the tipping point, it's just for the client. Going through the SEPA piece, when that additional fee came through the SEPA, that was where we got to the tipping point of whether or not it would pencil, and this wasn't them like threatening anything or us or anything, but. And so even though it seems minor, it's been kind of that slow add-on, like the little snowball.
1,000 cuts.
Approach, yes, and so, I just wanted to add that, I think that they definitely have the safety in mind, and that is something. I realize it's too late in the process to say, well, where else could we cut, what's something that's not quite as necessary, because everything has been necessary through this process. But I do agree, it doesn't seem as significant, but as every piece adds up, it definitely feels significant to the client.
Well, and I think you might find them more sympathetic here with council, and that's probably the appropriate place to bring up your concerns. I don't think it's at planning commission.
Yeah, the safety too is I was listening to the. Pluses and minuses there, because the safety is paramount, that is already kind of a sketchy turn anyway to be a pedestrian and to have more people going up and down that street. With more cars going up and down that street, it would seem to be the most responsible thing to continue that sidewalk all the way to Fifth. So.
So we have on record our various recommendations and conditions, correct?
That's correct. I think the one unclear thing to me remains, I didn't hear clear deliberation on the lighting. I know that was brought up as part of the public testimony, so you should probably consider the concern about street lighting. In the SEPA, the applicant says that the lighting is not going to cause significant glare, but they didn't specifically propose any mitigation. So now would be a time to consider that. If you think it's likely to cause a significant impact, you could either require analysis or you could require.
Well, I can fully understand the desire for lack of light pollution, but at the same time, I question. From Dwayne's standpoint, how much dampening you want. From a liability and a safety standpoint. And I agree with Mike, the Cobra heads are essentially downward light fixtures. I mean, there's not going to be no light pollution. You've got street lights in the subdivision. If council wants to bring that up at council, that's fine, but I don't see an issue for us here.
No,
And then the other item that I don't think we got clear direction on the record was, you had mentioned something about parks equipment and who's gonna review that. I kind of think we landed that you were okay with staff reviewing that and just allowing you all to browse and provide input through staff.
Correct. Okay,
I believe we have everything clear in the record now, and I can
can I
file
hear,
that into the staff report to council.
very good, can I hear a motion? No. No. We have a long night. We haven't got to our real meeting yet, you know.
I will make a motion that we recommend approval of the Callis Meadows subdivision to city council.
Would that be subject to the conditions that discussed?
Subject to the conditions that we have discussed this evening. Yeah.
Do I hear a second?
I will second the motion.
Any further discussion? Call a roll vote. Dan,
Pardon?
aye or nay?
Oh, aye.
Brian,
Aye.
aye,
Aye.
unanimously passed. Congratulations, welcome to the neighborhood.
Very good news.
Can we continue with the rest of our meeting?
Yes, sir.
I believe we, did you folks have a chance to read the minutes?
Yes.
I know it was lengthy reading.
25 pages of it.
I like the format though.
You know, it's really the summary
Yeah.
that you're approving.
Right.
And then keeping the transcript for reference.
I fully understood that and I thought it was awesome.
Yes, I thought it was great.
Thank you so very much for preparing that.
I
Huh?
bet you did.
It's in the chat.
Oh, did you? Oh, yeah, I wrote it. There you go.
Okay, entertain a motion to accept the minutes from last meeting.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from last meeting.
I will second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Business licenses. Have you had a chance to go over these?
Yes, indeed. I
Any-
don't see any fees. Were there none?
I leave those off.
Okay, all right. They're kind of standard
They're serious.
or none at all.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, well,
I was particularly amused by it's not a farm LLC. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Well, I would move that we approve the business licenses that are.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Now, unfinished business, Toledo Development and Building Fee Schedule. Update,
Update?
that's what it says.
So I have in front of you tonight the result of what staff compiled from your input in the review of the fee schedule for the last meeting.
Right.
And if I could pull it up here on my iPad. What we've done, I guess I can speak from memory until I can find it here on my device. I actually have it printed. What we've done here is we have gone with what you all directed us to was to go with the Kalama fees that they had just recently reviewed and adopted. So what we've done here is we've taken all of Kalama's fees and put those forward. We've done a preliminary review to make sure that they're consistent with the processes that you have in place, so you're not charging a fee for a process you don't have.
Yes.
And then for the ones that weren't in Kalama code, but were in Toledo's code, you all had a more significant section on marijuana and licensing and all of that, which Kalama did not have, so we just maintained what you had in place.
Okay.
We didn't change it or delete it. So we kept the fees that you had that they did not have. We deleted the fees that they had that you didn't have a process for. And then we brought forward the Kalama fees, and then over in the column, we did a fee comparison to show you how much that fee was changing based on what you had. There were a couple that we brought forward because you have processes but didn't have a fee. And those are so noted. So we tried to make this as easy as we could to be interpreted and compared to what you have based on what we were recommending. So I guess if there's any questions about that, then I'd be happy to address those. We did have a couple of footnotes to the table that we brought in. We maintained the ones you had, but then we've also brought in a couple from Kalama.
Okay.
Well, I guess if you'd like to have some discussion on that tonight, give staff additional direction. I don't believe this requires a public hearing of planning commission. It will require a public hearing to change this at council. So I think, I don't think we have to set this for a public hearing. I think if you're satisfied with this, you could make a recommendation to forward it to council for hearing and consideration. And then I'll talk to council and we'll get it set on their agenda if they choose to pick this up. Or we can take more input and we can bring it back again at the next meeting to.
I didn't see anything I didn't like.
I didn't either. I went through it and it was all fine for me.
Yeah.
I see how we address the regressive building permit situation, so.
Yeah. That was the main thing, and then everything else is exactly like what we talked about.
So can I get a motion?
I will make a motion to approve. Building permit fees. I got changes.
Make a motion to forward to council for approval and public hearing.
Recommended to council.
What? Yes,
You have, is the street vacation, is that alley vacation? The one that's 3,900% up?
Yeah. It would be for any public right of way. We could clarify that to right of way vacation. I mean, they're commonly called street vacation processes, but the same would apply to an alley. Even though it's not a street. So if you wanted to forward this with that change, we can make the change and still forward it to councils. If planning commission desires to make that change, or council could make it when it gets in front of them as well, or we could just leave it that way.
So there's a motion on the table to
Yes,
recommend this to council as for approval. I will second that.
For discussion? So to make it clear, we're forwarding this to council with our recommendation for a public hearing and approval,
Yeah.
correct? Huh? You collecting name, please?
Pardon me?
You collecting name, please?
Oh, no, well, it looks like I am, but no, I'm not. And, let's see, the motion was seconded, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think we got a second.
Yeah, we did.
Otherwise I would have.
Okay, with no further discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All ayes, motion carries.
He was using it to balance his tablet.
Oh, that's what it was, okay. I don't believe we have any old business or other business to take care of. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Get a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned.
Wasn't that long afterwards.